The next station will be Fortuna 69.
I don't need to tell you that DE has a habit of releasing content and then either never touching it again or ignoring it until a few months down the line. Although this can usually be attributed to DE simply needing to focus on bigger and more anticipated updates, which are usually part of mainline content, doing this over and over naturally results in an excess of old content that remains in-game as is, unchanged for months or even years at a time. How long did we have channeling mods until they got killed when the second phase of the Melee 3.0 changes came out? How long was Arcwing ignored until Railjack was released? How long did it take for Nyx to get a rework, even though it wasn't even good? My point here is, we have a considerable amount of content that could use tweaks or some form of modernization that remains unchanged purely because it's on the waiting list, since DE also has a habit of being a bit overly ambitious, which more often than not results in content either coming out completely different than what was promised, such as the Old Blood update, completely delayed, such as the massive content drought we had in waiting for the War Within update, or completely bugged, such as Spectres of the Rail or Railjack. Of course, Warframe is in perpetual beta, but in my opinion, that's no excuse to rush out content just to meet demand. Having a bug or two upon release is to be expected, because that's just how it is. Even if it's completely incorrect, establishing a roadmap for yourself is a totally understandable thing to do, because it shows that you, somewhat, have an idea of what you want to make for the game. In the wait for an update to be polished, players might complain about content drought in the same way that Barrock players are complaining about a lack of augments. In the wait for an update to come out on schedule, players might complain again about content drought, which does result in the possibility of an update being rushed out just to meet player demand. Is that acceptable? If you ask me, no. It's one thing to complain about a lack of content or about some already existing content not being updated, but it's a completely different story when the lack of content isn't due to the developers being occupied with other things, but when it's due to the developers simply being focused on wrapping up an update. As an example, even though I'm personally still not 100% satisfied with the Vauban rework, I haven't said anything more about it even though he's only received 2 changes since his rework has dropped because DE themselves have stated that more will come soon. However, given that they're currently on holiday break and they still have more important stuff to do such as bugfix Railjack, I don't mind waiting. Normally I despise being kept waiting, but knowing that DE has to finish mainline content first when they return from the holidays, I can deal with being put on hold for any further tweaks to Vauban. If you ask me, there are 2 types of old content. There's the real old content, which is simply the things in-game that have just not been mentioned or just been barely touched by DE since release, such as the Sergeant boss fight or the Conclave. And there's the artificial old content, which is simply content that DE has acknowledged but has still not really done anything, such as raids or the Plains of Eidolon. Old content is prevalent throughout Warframe because the development team simply cannot work on everything at once, because that would require a considerable amount of manpower that DE does not currently have. Otherwise, DE would literally be spreading themselves so thin that updates in general would take even longer than normal to make. As much as I wish that we could go back to the old days where we had events and content on practically a monthly basis, that's simply not achievable anymore in this day and age, because back then DE constantly seeks to deliver bigger and better updates, as seen with how they first treated making the Second Dream as a huge lore bomb, followed by the Plains of Eidolon being a huge first step into open-world play for Warframe, followed by Fortuna as basically being a bigger Plains of Eidolon, etc. etc. What I'm trying to say is, we will never not have old content. Complaining about content drought nowadays is kind of like saying that the sky is blue, because not only is it obvious, but it's a given now because of DE self-imposed constantly seeking to expand policy. Thank you for watching.